Welcome back to today's Deep Dive, the First Intelligence podcast. Today's Friday, August 1st, 2025. This is the 23 episode. Let's do this before the weekend. A lot has been happening around the world, so let's get to it. I hope you already follow us on our YouTube channel, Next Site Intelligence, and also on Spotify. Look us up, Deep Dive Intelligence Podcast. And make sure to follow us. So let's take a look at today's intelligence report. Today we're diving into the intelligence brief for Thursday, July 31st, 2025. And our source is Next Site. They're an amazing and really dedicated intelligence company focusing on global intelligence.
They really are. And they developed their own open source intelligence platform too, Site Connect.
That's right, Site Connect, designed specifically to help investigators globally. It's pretty impressive stuff.
Definitely.
If you're curious, you can find out more about their tailored reports and all their work at www.next-site.com. So, as you know, this is our regular daily deep dive, our mission today, to unpack the most important nuggets from this massive report, giving you a shortcut to being truly well-informed. Okay, let's unpack this.
Right. And what's fascinating here is just, well, how quickly events are unfolding across the globe. I mean, impacting everything from economies to human rights. The bottom line up front, the BLUF for July 31st, it really points to a significant escalation in global trade tensions.
Yeah. Seems like the big headline.
It is. Former U.S. President Trump has imposed these new, pretty hefty tariffs, we're talking 35–50%, on goods from Canada, Mexico, Brazil, and Europe.
Wow.
And, well, predictably, that's triggered a wave of retaliatory moves and protests all around the world. But beyond trade, there's a lot else going on. We're seeing Europe grappling with, economic and migration pressures. Germany's new hardline policy is a big driver there, plus ongoing inflation concerns.
And the steelmakers.
Yeah, European steelmakers are bracing for oversupply because these U.S. tariffs are basically shifting global flows their way.
Right.
North America sees troop withdrawals, but also volatile markets. Asia, busy with new sovereign wealth funds and really accelerating AI deployment. Middle East is still locked into Gaza ceasefire efforts and, sadly, ongoing violence. Africa continues to battle major health and governance crises. Latin America is directly confronting this U.S. tariff aggression, although Mexico did get a temporary reprieve.
A short one, maybe.
Feels like it. And finally, Oceania. We're seeing a notable shift in energy policy there and deepening geostrategic engagement. It's a truly interconnected global picture.
Absolutely. And what makes this report so valuable isn't just the breadth, but the specific details, and crucially, how it helps us understand the nuances.
Exactly.
It's not just what happened, but how confident the intelligence company is in that information and what it implies for the threat landscape. That's a real game changer, right? It really shifts how we interpret what's going on.
It does. And this raises an important question, about how we interpret information, especially when things are moving so fast globally. NextSite uses these crucial classification flags. They indicate reliability and confidence. It's like their built-in truth meter, if you will.
Okay, so break those down for us.
Sure. First, there's the threat level. It's based on the UK system, but with plus or minus modifiers. Low means an attack is highly unlikely. Moderate suggests it's possible, but not likely. Then moderate plus means indicators are increasing.
Okay.
Substantial means an attack is likely. Substantial is slightly receding from that. Severe means highly likely. Severe plus is approaching critical imminence, and critical means an attack is expected imminently.
Got it. So a clear scale of danger.
Exactly. Then there's source reliability using the Admiralty A to F scale, pretty standard in the intel world. A means the source is completely reliable. B is usually reliable. C, fairly reliable. D, not usually reliable. E is unreliable. And F means reliability just cannot be judged.
A through F, like grades.
Sort of, yeah.
Right.
And lastly, information confidence, rated on a 1 to 6 scale. 1 means the information is confirmed by independent sources, rock solid. 2 is probably true. 3 is possibly true. 4 is doubtfully true. 5 is improbable. And 6 means, again, it just cannot be judged. These flags are vital. They give you, the listener, a critical lens to assess the information. You understand the level of certainty NextSite has, helps differentiate a confirmed fact from, say, a developing assessment.
Right, so it gives us a real sense of the firmness of the intelligence.
Yeah.
How should someone, say, an investor or a business leader, actually use these flags when we look at the regional highlights?
Well, they're crucial for risk assessment. For example, a B2 rating with a low threat level. That generally means you can act on it with high confidence, minimal immediate risk.
Right.
But a D4 with a high threat, that tells you this is highly uncertain information, possibly biased, and points to a significant but unconfirmed danger. It's about tailoring your response to the certainty or uncertainty of the information.
Makes sense. Let's put these flags to work then. Let's dive into the regional intelligence. All right, let's start with North America. First up, Pentagon pulls National Guard from Los Angeles. This is flag B2 threat level low. What's the significance here?
Okay, so the B2 means the information is usually reliable and probably true. The low threat level confirms the immediate danger is minimal. This basically tells us the situation in Los Angeles, those anti-war and pro-Palestinian protests, has significantly de-escalated. The Pentagon is withdrawing 1,000 of the 3,500 guardsmen deployed, following requests from the governor and mayor. It's a sign local law enforcement is seen as capable now.
That's fine.
Saves the Pentagon about $9 million in operational costs, so a clear de-escalation signal.
Okay. Next, there's a big legal challenge. The U.S. Appeals Court questions Trump's tariff authority. This one's flagged C3 threat level, moderate. What's at stake for businesses?
Right. The C3 flag tells us it's fairly reliable information, but only possibly true at this stage. The moderate threat level signals significant legal uncertainty that could disrupt supply chains.
How so?
Well, judges are questioning if Trump's 50% tariffs on foreign steel and autos actually exceed presidential authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the IEEPA. If a ruling goes against the government, it could unwind billions in tariff revenue. Corporations would have to rethink their entire sourcing and production strategies. So it's a real and developing risk to watch.
That legal uncertainty is compounded by the next item. U.S. escalates trade war with Canada over Palestinian recognition. Also a C3, threat level, moderate. This seems deeply intertwined with foreign policy.
It absolutely is. Again, C3 means fairly reliable, possibly true, moderate threat. Trump explicitly linked a threatened 35% tariff on all Canadian goods directly to Ottawa's recognition of a Palestinian state. He pressured Prime Minister Mark Carney via social media.
Wow, using trade as direct leverage on foreign policy recognition.
Exactly. And given the sheer volume of trade, about $762 billion annually, a 35% tariff could be catastrophic for farmers, exporters on both sides. Suddenly, Canadian foreign policy becomes a direct economic factor for businesses.
No surprise then that this uncertainty spilled into the markets. Global markets volatility on tariff uncertainty. This is a B2, threat level, moderate. What does this tell us about investor sentiment?
Well, the B2 confirms this is a usually reliable, probably true observation, with a moderate threat level related to market stability. It highlights just how sensitive global finance is to trade policy moves or even just threats. The MSCI World Share Index fell. The U.S. dollar strengthened, a classic flight to safety. European stocks, particularly beverage makers and luxury brands, got hit hard as investors basically priced in lower corporate earnings due to potential tariffs. It immediately impacts equity valuations and currency rates globally.
And finally, for North America, a particularly uncertain one. The legal justification for tariffs on Brazil. This one is flagged D4, bracketed, threat level, high. That D4 is quite a cautionary flag, especially bracketed.
Indeed. That D4 bracketed high threat tells us approach this with extreme caution.
Why bracketed?
Bracketed means limited corroboration and potential political bias in the source information. The D means the source isn't usually reliable, and the 4 means the information itself is doubtfully true.
So very shaky ground.
Very. Trump invoked an economic emergency to justify a 50% tariff on Brazilian goods, citing alleged human rights abuses and influence operations. Now, Brazil is preparing countermeasures, targeting about $44 billion of imports. But those D4 flags are critical here. They point to a high potential impact, but the justification itself is highly questionable. It really underscores the political weaponization of tariffs.
Okay, let's move across the Atlantic to Europe. First, we're seeing Germany leads hardline migration turn, flagged B3 threat level, moderate. How significant is this shift?
It's pretty significant. The B3 means usually reliable info, possibly true, moderate threat. Germany's center-right government adopted strict new asylum measures. We're talking border detention centers, swift deportations.
What's driving that?
Mainly public concern and the rise of far-right support. It could cost about $2.5 billion annually, but NGOs are already threatening legal challenges, so it's a critical watch item.
On a more positive economic note, Eurozone inflation nears ECB target, flagged A1 threat level, low. And A1, that's as confident as it gets.
Absolutely. A1, low threat. This confirms that preliminary July data showing German, Italian, and French inflation hovering around 1–2% is completely reliable and independently confirmed.
Good news for the ECB then.
It suggests Eurozone inflation is stabilizing near their 2% target, mainly because energy costs have come down. For fixed income investors, this led to marginal falls in bond yields. It signals maybe fewer aggressive ECB rate cuts ahead.
Then a bit of de-escalation. The US-EU trade deal caps tariffs, a B2 threat level, low. What's the strategic impact here?
Right, B2, low threat. Usually reliable, probably true, low immediate risk. Under this new framework, the U.S. agreed to cap import tariffs on EU goods at 15% and exempt about 400 products.
And in return?
In return, the EU pledged to buy $250 billion of U.S. energy annually. It's a strategic move, really, aimed at preventing a full-blown trade war and preserving transatlantic supply chains. Could save EU exporters about $8 billion a year.
However, not everyone benefits. European steelmakers brace for tariff-driven oversupply, flag B2, a threat level, moderate. This sounds like a direct ripple effect, doesn't it?
It is, exactly.
Yeah.
B2, moderate threat, usually reliable, probably true, poses a moderate risk to that sector. Companies like ArcelorMittal are projecting lower profits precisely because U.S. tariffs are expected to redirect Asian and South American steel towards Europe.
Creating a glut.
Yep, creating an oversupply and depressing prices. Their shares already fell 4–5%, which just underscores how these trade policies distort global flows and squeeze profit margins for specific industries.
In terms of energy security, the EU pools demand to buy U.S. gas, flagged B3, threat level, moderate. How realistic is this plan?
Well, the EU committed to increase purchases of U.S. oil, gas, and nuclear fuel to $750 billion over 3 years. The B3 flag implies this is usually reliable news, possibly true, with a moderate potential impact or uncertainty.
Can they actually do it?
The Commission could use its aggregate EU platform to pool demand, aiming for better prices and supply security. But analysts are pretty skeptical if that $750 billion target is realistic, given declining gas demand in Europe and, frankly, limited U.S. export capacity. So it's a commitment that needs careful monitoring.
And wrapping up Europe, Euro stocks slide on tariff and earnings fears. A B2, threat level, moderate. What specifically hit them?
The STOXX 600 index fell. Italian stocks were down significantly. The B2 flag confirms this is a usually reliable, probably true observation, moderate threat level. Beyond the beverage makers we mentioned, impacted by tariffs, luxury brands like Ferrari dropped a whopping 11.7%, but that was also due to earnings disappointments.
So a mix of factors.
A mix, but the broad selling was triggered by concerns that tariffs would erode profits generally and slow global demand. It directly links corporate performance back to these geopolitical decisions.
Okay, let's shift focus to Asia. First, Indonesia launches $30 billion sovereign wealth fund, flagged B2 threat level, low. This sounds like an ambitious play.
It is ambitious. The B2 low flag indicates it's usually reliable, probably true with low immediate threat. Indonesia's new fund, called Danantara, aims to attract foreign co-investment, mainly for infrastructure and green projects. The goal is to boost growth to 8%.
Following any models?
Yeah, it's modeled on Singapore's Temasek for governance. But, as often happens, opposition politicians have raised concerns about transparency. That's a common challenge for these big new state-backed funds.
We also see Asian jet fuel flows to Europe surge, a B2, threat level, low. This sounds like a strategic arbitrage opportunity being seized.
Exactly right. B2 low threat tells us it's a reliable observation. South Korean and Chinese refiners sharply increased jet fuel shipments to Europe. Why? They're leveraging a $120 per ton price difference by rerouting tankers via the Suez Canal.
What's driving that price gap?
Rebounding European demand combined with U.S. sanctions on Russian oil. It just highlights how geopolitical shifts can create these new profit margins for suppliers who are nimble enough to act.
China's making big moves with China, accelerates real-world AI deployment, flagged B3, threat level, moderate. What's striking about this?
What's striking is China's dual play here. They're aggressively deploying AI in manufacturing and healthcare, aiming to surpass the U.S. in real-world applications. That's the B3 flag, usually reliable, possibly true, moderate-level implications.
What's the dual play aspect?
Well, Beijing wants to reduce dependence on U.S. tech and use AI to offset slowing economic growth. But at the same time, this rapid deployment creates potential security vulnerabilities and, interestingly, the risk of oversupply within their own tech ecosystem. It highlights this critical tension between national ambition and domestic stability.
Which ties neatly into the next point. China summons Nvidia over H20 chip security. This is a C3 threat level, moderate. Is this purely about security, or is there more to it?
Good question. The C3 flag suggests fairly reliable information, possibly true, moderate threat level. China's Cyberspace Administration questioned Nvidia about potential backdoors and data transfer vulnerabilities in its H20 AI chips, and they've delayed import licenses.
So security concerns on the surface.
On the surface, yes. But this probe could also be retaliation for U.S. export controls on technology. It definitely threatens Nvidia's projected $5 billion sales in China, and, well, it could potentially benefit domestic Chinese tech firms like Huawei.
Finally, for Asia, India's voter roll revision stirs controversy. A C3 threat level, moderate. What's the concern here?
Again, C3, moderate means fairly reliable, possibly true, moderate potential for disruption. Indian election authorities are revising voter lists, requiring citizens to link their identities to new digital ID cards.
And the controversy.
Critics fear this will disenfranchise millions, particularly laborers and migrants who often lack stable documentation or access and who may lean toward opposition parties. It highlights potential political targeting and could lead to protests, which of course impacts economic activity.
Now, onto the Middle East, where tensions remain incredibly high. First, the U.S. envoy presses Netanyahu and Hamas on Gaza ceasefire, B2 threat level. High. That high threat level really underscores the severity.
It certainly does. B2 means usually reliable, probably true information. But the high threat level signals the severity of the underlying conflict and the high stakes involved. U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff is pushing hard for a week-long ceasefire and an aid corridor into Gaza. He's warning of famine conditions and even threatening sanctions against corrupt Palestinian Authority officials.
So mounting international pressure.
Absolutely. Driven by starvation deaths and widespread displacement, potential sanctions could freeze millions in PA accounts, adding another layer of complexity.
Tragically related, casualties mount as Palestinians seek aid, flagged C3 threat level, high. This is just a recurring horror.
It is. The C3 here means fairly reliable information, possibly true, but again, high threat level reflecting the deadly reality on the ground. At least 47 Palestinians were reported killed near an aid distribution point. Witnesses reported Israeli forces firing on crowds. This incident drew worldwide condemnation and prompted calls for an independent investigation. It emphasizes the extreme dangers civilians face and, sadly, the risk of donor fatigue if aid can't be delivered safely.
We also see Germany warns Israel of isolation. Iran accused of plots, flagged B3, threat level, moderate. What's the diplomatic fallout here?
Okay, B3, moderate. Usually reliable info, possibly true, moderate implications. Germany's foreign minister publicly urged Israel to accept ceasefire proposals, reflecting that growing international concern over Gaza. Simultaneously, 5 Western governments accused Iran of plotting to kill dissidents abroad. These are parallel tracks, but they could lead to potential sanctions on Iran and might affect defense contracts with Israel down the line.
And then, deeply troubling news, settler arson attack kills Palestinian man flagged B3, threat level, high. This indicates an immediate, grave threat.
Yes, B3, usually reliable, possibly true, but high threat level due to the violence and potential for escalation. Israeli settlers allegedly torched a Palestinian home in the West Bank, killing a man and injuring his family. This reflects a documented surge in settler violence, happening amidst calls by far-right Israeli ministers to annex the West Bank.
Fueling the fire.
Exactly. It underscores the severe escalation of tensions, the direct human cost, and Hamas has already vowed retaliation, so the cycle continues.
Moving south to Africa.
Sure.
First, South Africa prepares last-minute trade offer, a B2, threat level, moderate. This sounds like a desperate attempt to avoid those U.S. tariffs.
It seems that way. B2, moderate, means usually reliable, probably true, with moderate economic threat if they fail. South Africa is preparing what they call a serious proposal to avoid a potential 30% U.S. tariff on key exports like citrus, wine, and autos. They're warning internally of significant job losses.
What are they offering?
Reportedly market-opening measures. They really want to prevent a potential $2 billion cut in exports and the loss of around 135,000 jobs. These negotiations are crucial for their economy right now.
A major health crisis unfolding. Cholera outbreak hits West and Central Africa, and A2, threat level, high. This is incredibly reliable and deeply concerning.
Yes. A2, high threat, signifies a critical humanitarian crisis. The information is completely reliable, A, and probably true, too. UNICEF warned that cholera has infected over 200,000 people and killed 4,000 across 14 African countries.
What's causing it?
Heavy rains, poor sanitation, climate change damaging water infrastructure, and ongoing conflict displacing populations, leaving them vulnerable. Economic losses from reduced productivity could reach hundreds of millions. It's a massive crisis.
On a more positive note, Kenya and Uganda sign 8 Mount Rose flagged B2, threat level, low. This points towards greater regional integration.
Exactly. B2, low threat. Usually reliable, probably true info, low immediate risk, positive development. These memorandums of understanding cover energy, defense, transport, and ICT. They're aiming to harmonize tariffs on cross-border rail, develop a regional oil pipeline, boost cybersecurity cooperation,
The goal?
reduce reliance on external partners, attract investment potentially over $5 billion and lower transaction costs. It's about fostering regional growth from within.
Sadly, back to crisis. The hunger and displacement crisis in Sudan continues, in A2, threat level, high. What's fueling this catastrophe?
Another A2, high threat. Completely reliable, probably true report of a severe ongoing crisis. Fighting between government forces and rebels combined with floods and economic collapse has created catastrophic hunger, according to aid agencies, and the world's largest displacement crisis right now.
Is aid getting through?
Agencies are struggling immensely to deliver food, hampered by the fighting, political power struggles, and those climate-driven floods. An emergency appeal for $4 billion has been launched. It's threatening agriculture, even oil pipelines.
And finally, for Africa, the deeply disturbing news of M23 rebels massacre civilians in DR Congo, flagged A3, threat level, high, a severe human rights violation.
Yes, A3, high threat. The source is completely reliable, A, but the information is rated possibly true, 3, likely due to the difficulty of confirming details in a conflict zone. But the high threat level reflects the extreme violence. UN investigators accused M23 rebels of killing at least 169 civilians in Rutshuru, documenting mass graves. This atrocity reportedly happened as rebels sought to control territory and extract resources. It highlights the severe security challenges impacting mining operations and, of course, humanitarian aid.
Okay, let's move to Latin America. First, Nicaraguan veteran arrested in corruption probe, flagged C3, threat level, moderate. Is this a genuine anti-corruption move or perhaps something else?
That's the question. C3, moderate, means fairly reliable info, possibly true, moderate potential implications. Authorities accused Bayardo Arce, a close ally of President Ortega, of siphoning $100 million.
On the surface, anti-corruption.
Yes, but critics view it potentially as Ortega targeting inner circle rivals. International groups are calling for due process. The U.S. State Department is monitoring. There's potential recovery of over $200 million, but it could also impact investor confidence depending on how it's perceived.
Then, a temporary reprieve we mentioned earlier. Trump agrees to 90-day tariff reprieve for Mexico, a B2 threat level. Moderate. This sounds like a strategic pause.
It does. B2, moderate, suggests usually reliable, probably true info, moderate economic implications. Trump postponed those threatened 35% tariffs on Mexican exports for 90 days after a call with President Sheinbaum.
What did Mexico offer?
They pledged to crack down on migration flows and buy more U.S. corn. This gives temporary relief for about $128 billion worth of Mexican exports, but it also clearly highlights how trade and immigration are often linked in policy, especially maybe ahead of U.S. elections.
Despite the reprieve for Mexico, Brazil protests against U.S. tariffs, a C3 threat level. Moderate. The public sentiment seems strong there.
It does. C3, moderate. Fairly reliable, possibly true, moderate potential for disruption. Workers' unions organize protests in major Brazilian cities against Trump's proposed 50% tariffs on their commodities and manufactured goods.
What's their argument?
That the tariffs are punitive, politically motivated, and violate sovereignty. Agribusiness leaders warn these tariffs could cut exports by $20 billion. The protests themselves have already disrupted port operations, highlighting significant economic and social friction.
On a completely different note, an ancient grave unearthed in Lima, flagged B2, threat level, low. A fascinating discovery, but how does this fit into the global intelligence picture?
Well, maybe not a geopolitical bombshell, but the B2 low flag confirms a usually reliable, probably true report of a significant cultural find with low immediate wider threat. Workers installing a water pipeline stumbled upon a 1,000-year-old pre-Hispanic burial site. Construction halted.
So the relevance.
It underscores Peru's rich archaeological heritage, the need for pre-construction surveys. It could bring tourism revenue eventually, but right now it increases project costs due to delays. It's about those unexpected factors impacting development.
We also see Panama communities challenge canal expansion, flag B2, threat level, moderate. This sounds like a classic conflict between development and community rights.
It is exactly that. B2, moderate, usually reliable, probably true info, moderate potential impact on the project. Indigenous and farming communities are suing Panama's government over a planned $1.6 billion reservoir needed for the Panama Canal expansion.
What's their argument?
They argue it would displace 2,500 people and flood sacred lands. They're seeking an injunction. It highlights that conflict between major economic development and environmental or community rights. Delays could cost Panama millions in lost toll revenue.
Finally, for Latin America, Lula's approval rises amid tariff dispute, flagged B3, threat level, moderate. Is this a kind of populist surge?
It might reflect that. B3, moderate means usually reliable info, possibly true, moderate political implications. A recent poll showed Brazilian President Lula da Silva's approval climbing to 53%. This comes as he's vocally challenging U.S. tariffs and also punished some officials implicated in alleged U.S. interference.
So standing up to the U.S. is popular.
It appears so. This public support could reflect nationalist sentiment, strengthening Lula's bargaining power in the trade dispute, even though markets might worry about a prolonged conflict.
Last but certainly not least, let's head to Oceania Pacific. The FBI upgrades New Zealand office, flagged B2, threat level, moderate. This seems like a significant strategic move.
It is significant. B2, moderate, usually reliable, probably true, moderate strategic implications. FBI Director Kash Patel opened a larger office in Wellington and, importantly, expanded its jurisdiction across the Pacific Islands.
Why the expansion?
Patel cited the need to defend democracy against Chinese influence and also transnational organized crime, working closely with Five Eyes partners. It shows U.S. intelligence views the Pacific as a key strategic front now.
And this upgrade follows the FBI director's secretive visit to Australia, a C3 threat level, moderate. Why the secrecy around that?
Well, C3, moderate. Fairly reliable, possibly true, moderate sensitivity. Patel made an unpublicized visit to Canberra to discuss cybercrime and Chinese influence right before flying to New Zealand. An Australian MP criticized the secrecy, calling for more parliamentary oversight.
So it signals closer cooperation but raises transparency questions.
Exactly. It underscores tightening intelligence cooperation amid concerns about Chinese espionage, but also highlights those intangible costs or questions around secrecy in surveillance operations.
We have some quick Pacific news in brief. Flag B3, threat level, low. What's the takeaway from these diverse items?
Right, B3, low. Usually reliable, possibly true info, low overall threat. This collection highlights the variety of issues Pacific nations deal with daily. You've got New Zealand's PM addressing Papua New Guinea's parliament, that's diplomacy. Fiji cracking down on food safety breaches, that's public health enforcement. And that tsunami warning for Aotearoa, New Zealand.
So a snapshot.
Exactly. A snapshot of ongoing regional challenges and cooperation diplomacy, public health, environmental vigilance, all happening concurrently.
Speaking of that tsunami warning for Aotearoa after Kamchatka quake, and A2, threat level, low. How prepared are they for such events?
Well, the A2 low flag indicates a completely reliable, probably true report with low actual impact this time. New Zealand's National Emergency Management Agency issued the warning after a big 8.8 magnitude earthquake near Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula. They advised people to stay off beaches, predicting relatively small waves, 0.2 to 0.6 meters.
So no major damage.
No major damage was expected or reported, but it really underscored the importance of their crisis communications systems and the need for ongoing contingency planning for any operations in the Pacific, given it's in the Ring of Fire.
And finally, for Oceania, a major policy reversal. New Zealand reverses ban on offshore oil and gas exploration, flagged B3 threat level. Moderate. This has significant implications, surely.
It really does. B3, moderate. Usually reliable, possibly true, moderate long-term implications. New Zealand's parliament voted to lift a 2018 ban on new offshore oil and gas exploration.
Why the reversal?
The current national-led government argues new exploration is needed to avoid energy shortages, blackouts, price spikes. Critics, of course, say this reversal undermines their climate commitments.
So a trade-off.
A big one. This decision could bring billions in investment, but it also carries the risk of creating stranded assets if global demand shifts away from fossil fuels faster than anticipated. Big, long-term gamble.
Okay, that covers the regions. But what does this all mean for the people on the ground? This is where the people's hearsay section is so valuable, right? It gives us that crucial ground-level sentiment, perspectives that often illuminate tensions numbers alone can't show.
Absolutely. These 5 quotes really illustrate the direct human impact of these global decisions. Take the Brazilian farmer on tariffs. He told Brazil de Fato, "We will lose our livelihoods if the U.S. taxes our soy and beef at 50%.
You can feel the desperation there.
You can. The sentiment is anger, nationalist defiance, too. It signals an elevated risk of anti-American boycotts, potentially. Then, you have a German NGO leader on migration policy. A Caritas Germany spokesperson reacted to those new detention centers, saying, "This is a betrayal of Europe's humanitarian values."
Strong words.
Very. It expresses alarm and predicts an increase in asylum litigation. It highlights deep moral and legal pushback against those hardline policies. And U.S. constitutional scholar on tariffs gave a legal perspective after that D.C. Circuit hearing we discussed. He argued, "The IEPA does not allow the president to rewrite tariff schedules. Congress must step in."
So, questioning the legality.
Directly, highlighting legal skepticism and the potential for checks on executive power, emphasizing the deep legal challenges these policies face. From Oceania, a Fiji health inspector on their food safety crackdown stated with real determination, "We found 87 food outlets operating without licenses. This will not be tolerated."
Shows local action.
It does. It indicates maybe capacity challenges and enforcement, but also a clear resolve to improve public safety standards at that local level. And finally, a South African citrus exporter expressed deep anxiety to Reuters. If these tariffs hit, 20,000 jobs could vanish overnight.
Wow, stark numbers.
Just powerfully underscores the immediate economic stakes, the direct threat to livelihoods that these big geopolitical trade decisions pose. So if you summarize these quotes, you see themes emerge. Rising public frustration over trade policies, government decisions. Sentiment towards U.S. tariffs is definitely negative in Latin America and Africa. European civil society is worried about humanitarian principles eroding. And then the Fiji example shows local officials trying to enforce standards, maybe a strengthening of governance locally.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me, seeing how all these pieces fit together. The correlational analysis section connects these seemingly disparate events to show underlying patterns.
Precisely. Let's take tariff announcements versus equity markets. The threat of U.S. tariffs on Europe, Canada, Brazil. It coincided almost immediately with a 0.75% decline in the STOXX 600 index and that big 11.7% drop in Ferrari shares.
A clear link?
A very clear negative correlation. Tariff threats get priced into equities fast, especially hurting luxury and automotive sectors. The implication: corporate treasury departments need to actively hedge currency and commodity exposures when big trade news hits. Next, Eurozone inflation data versus bond yields. Remember that stable inflation news. When German inflation eased to 1.8% and Eurozone expectations stabilized near 2%, European bond yields saw modest declines.
Why?
Stable inflation reduces pressure on the ECB to cut rates aggressively, which tends to support the euro. For fixed income portfolios, this suggests adjusting duration, maybe anticipating slower rate cuts than previously expected, a subtle but significant strategy shift. Then, humanitarian crises versus political stability. Those severe cholera outbreaks and Sudan's displacement crisis, they clearly correlate with increased donor appeals and potentially increased migration flows.
Instability breeds more instability.
Often, yes. Countries facing health crises often experience social unrest, which can significantly impact local business operations and supply chains. So the implication for companies in those regions: prepare contingency plans, engage in CSR, and closely monitor security. How about environmental alerts versus economic activity? That tsunami warning in New Zealand. It temporarily disrupted coastal tourism and shipping. Luckily, no big economic losses this time. In parallel, New Zealand's reversal of the offshore drilling ban might attract investment, but it could also deter environmentally conscious investors.
A double-edged sword.
Exactly. This correlation highlights how the energy sector has to constantly weigh short-term gains against long-term environmental liabilities and, importantly, reputational risks. And finally, public approval versus trade policy. Remember President Lula's rising approval in Brazil amid the tariff dispute. It suggests a positive correlation, at least temporarily, between nationalist rhetoric against tariffs and domestic support.
So governments might use that.
They might leverage that approval to resist foreign pressure, which could potentially prolong trade disputes. For businesses, this means anticipating possibly protracted negotiations and building political risk more thoroughly into their market strategies.
Okay, this brings us to the crucial so what? For you, the listener, the actionable insights derived from all this incredible intelligence.
Right. The report lays out 5 key strategic recommendations. First, and it's priority 1 for CFOs and COOs, diversify supply chains, and hedge tariff exposure.
Makes sense.
With U.S. tariffs threatening major markets, companies really should explore alternative sourcing, maybe in Asia, Africa, Latin America, where tariffs aren't hitting, negotiate long-term contracts with non-U.S. suppliers, and use currency and commodity hedges to mitigate those price shocks. Second, engage in stakeholder diplomacy on trade. This is priority 2, aimed at CEOs and chief government relations officers.
What does that look like?
It means coordinating with industry associations to lobby governments, both your own and others, on fair trade practices, supporting bilateral negotiations, publicly advocating for rules-based trade to try and reduce some of this uncertainty. Third, support humanitarian relief efforts. Priority 2, aimed at chief sustainability or social responsibility officers, CSOs. Companies with exposure to Africa and the Middle East, where those crises are acute, should consider contributing funds or maybe in-kind assistance to cholera and hunger relief programs. It demonstrates social responsibility, which enhances brand reputation and can even mitigate community unrest locally.
Doing good while managing risk.
Exactly. Fourth, enhance environmental risk planning. Priority 3, also for CSOs. Develop contingency plans for natural disasters and extreme weather, like those tsunami warnings. Also, carefully evaluate the environmental impact of resource projects, like that offshore drilling decision, and engage with stakeholders to balance energy security and sustainability goals. And finally, number 5, monitor regulatory and legal challenges. This is back to priority 1, critical for the General Counsel.
Keeping eyes on the courts.
Yes. Tracking court rulings on tariff authority, like that U.S. case. Adapting contract clauses to account for rapid policy changes, assessing exposure to sanctions, ensuring compliance with shifting legal frameworks. It's crucial to avoid potentially significant legal and financial hits.
What an incredible deep dive. It really paints a picture of just how complex and interconnected our world is. As you can see, even seemingly isolated regional events, a court case here, a policy shift there, can have these global ripple effects. It just highlights the continuous need for comprehensive intelligence like this and for critical thinking to really navigate these complex realities.
Absolutely.
It's not just about knowing what is happening, but really digging into why it matters and how to respond effectively. Do not forget to follow us on YouTube and Spotify. Also, like, share, and comment. We do look forward to hearing your opinion. This is it for today, and have a nice weekend.